Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this professional development series sponsored by the Maine Department of Education. For those of you who have not met me yet, my name is Jason Anderson, and I'm the Visual and Performing Arts Content Specialist at the department. I've been working hard on your behalf this summer to try to smooth the road as best I can, but it's still a bumpy road ahead of us. So we're going to just buckle our seatbelts and hope that this professional development opportunity is of great use and interest to many of you. Back in the spring, when we were starting to hunt around for ideas for professional development to get everyone ready for the year, many of you expressed interest. We did a little cursory interest session with Victoria Stubbs and Michelle Snow about what they had done with virtual ensembles, and many of you told me that you'd like to have more guidance and more information on that. So I turned to our friend and colleague Josh Lund in MSAD 49, who had quite an experience with the Maine Virtual Choir back late, well actually probably through the spring and late spring and into the summer even. And I asked him if he would be willing to design a series with me that would help some of you maybe fill in the gaps of knowledge that you have on virtual ensembles, or if you're starting fresh and you've seen them on YouTube, or you've heard about them, seen them on Facebook, and you'd like to know more information. Our goal is to give you as much grounding in this as we can over the first two sessions, which would be today and a week from today, to try to get you familiar with and comfortable with some of the technology and the approach that you need to take, or that's advisable to take with your students or your classes. So Josh is going to give a presentation, and then we're going to have lots of time for question and answer. And then next week, there's going to be an exit ticket for this session, and Josh and I are going to look at the results from the exit ticket to help craft next week, where I think we're going to dive a little more into some more of the technology. Today's intended to give you an overview of the process and to help you start preparing how to approach this with your students, with your colleagues, maybe with some members of your tech department if they're willing to help support you in this endeavor. And also to give you an opportunity to hear what other colleagues that you have around the state are thinking about doing with this, or what their experiences have been. Because as Josh so eloquently said before we started the session, he's remarking to his wife that he thought it was funny that he was going to come on and tell everybody about all the mistakes that he made. But as we all know, we've made lots of mistakes along the way in our teaching, and it's how we learn and improve, is from sharing those pitfalls with others, I think. So, so Josh, I'm going to turn it over to you. If at any point anybody has a question and they don't want to interrupt the presentation, you can drop your question in the chat box, and then there will be a few logical spots that we'll stop and we can address questions, or we may just wait and get them at the end. All right, Josh, turn it over to you, man.
All right. Yeah. Hey. So again, my name is Josh Lund. I do elementary music. Actually, I do grades 1 through 6, general music, chorus, and a musical theater program at Benton Elementary School. But outside of that, I do a lot of photography and videography stuff as a hobby, and I've done some audio editing. So back in March, after the school shut down, in some of the thank you for letting me know that I can turn that up. Can you hear me better now? Good. Okay. So back in March, after we got out of schools, and some of the conversations and Jason's, meet and greet things where we were all just kind of lamenting life, the conversation was brought up about doing a virtual choir between a few of us, and I just kind of sitting there thinking, well, I've got some skills, got a little bit of knowledge in this, I might as well try it. So I contacted a few people. I contacted Christian Giddings, friend of mine, he's a mint, and just coordinated all this stuff to create the Maine Virtual Choir. If you haven't seen that, the piece we did was called Beneath the Pines, really beautiful. And in the process of doing that, I learned so much about how not to do a virtual choir. So, as Jason said, we're going to go with big picture stuff today. Let me get into the presentation here, and let me go into the actual present mode so you don't have to look at all the other stuff. Here we go. So virtual ensembles. Can you actually do this? I'll be honest when I say that not every school in every situation will be this will be a really great fit for. Depending on what you do and how you teach and what you have, you got to think about whether you want to try to do this. Today, we're just going to go over all the basics, background information, what it is and isn't, some essential questions to think about through the rest of this session and the next week's session, and kind of the pre-planning stuff that you want to think about beforehand. So, what is a virtual ensemble? I cannot emphasize this enough, and if you haven't figured it out already, you cannot create any kind of actual musical performance through Zoom. If you didn't know this, there's a delay over the internet. With a good connection, it takes 0.2 to 0.4 of a second for my sound to go from my microphone through my computer, through the internet to your speakers. Multiply that by however many times back and forth you're going, and the delay makes it pretty much impossible to do anything over a Zoom or Google Hangouts video calling type platform. So this was my definition: a music performance where each musician records themselves individually using a guide for synchronization. Those tracks are then edited together to create an ensemble performance. Sounds really simple. This is the basic flow chart kind of for how this works. You have your pre-planning, all your different decisions you're going to make: software, literature, teaching, planning, all that kind of stuff. You will need to create some sort of guide track for your students. That can be MIDI, that can be click tracks, that can be recordings of your accompaniment, that can be a ton of different things. We'll talk about that next week. You get those to your students, and somewhere in this section, there's the instruction that you give, obviously. I didn't specifically say that. Students record their stuff and they send the files back to you. There can be a revision process, and that can be as much as you want it to be. You take all the files they give you through Google Drive or whatever that is, and import them into the software that you're going to use. You have to take all of their files for your entire group and synchronize them. We'll talk about how to do that later. Then once everything's synchronized, then you can edit for the mix and dynamics and make it sound really nice. Video is optional, and I put this here. Doing a video is really optional, and we'll talk about kind of things to consider for that. But if you choose to do that, you'd make the video, you sync it with your audio, export the final file, and share it with your community, your students and parents and teachers, and everybody goes, "Yay, that was so awesome!" Even though you're probably going to be like me and sit there and think, "Wow, that could have been a lot better," but they all think it's awesome. I'm a little self-deprecating sometimes, so no worries. You saw some of these terms. Just a quick mention of the software and terminology. A digital audio workstation is a DAW, the audio editing software. A lot of you are probably familiar with GarageBand if you have a Mac. Logic Pro is the professional version of that software. Audacity is a free software for Mac or PC that is really fantastic. It's not the easiest to use, but it can do everything. And then there's the Adobe suite. Adobe Audition is the audio editor that goes along with all of the Adobe products. Then down below, NLEs, nonlinear editors, are video editing software, right? iMovie and Final Cut are the Mac versions. Almost every Mac computer and iPad and even newer iPhones have iMovie on them already. So you could theoretically do all this editing and all this work with an iPhone or an iPad. If you're a PC person, there's a ton of video editing softwares. Adobe Premiere is paid, but it's very powerful. DaVinci Resolve is free, very good, but not the easiest to use. And there's others we can talk about later. So this is where things kind of get interesting, these essential questions. I'm going to break each of these down to give you some thoughts to think about whether you really can do this or what you would need to do and teach, pre-teach to your students to make this work. can all my kids do this? Can I, the teacher, do this? And does it fit in my school situation? So let's break those down a little bit. Okay, how are we doing on, I gotta look, just looking at the chat here. Yes, it's being recorded. So Pat, as far as I know, it is not physically possible to create any type of program that works over the internet in time. It's a natural thing of it just physically takes a small amount of time, but time for information to travel through all of the internet's networks and stuff. And that's something that we can minimize, but you can't get rid of it. Like I said, a tenth of a second, 2/10 of a second, every time that goes back and forth, it ends up multiplying on itself. So it just becomes a significant issue.
And it's not necessarily uniform either, Josh, right? I mean, it depends on the speed of your connection, and if your students or your ensemble is working at different connection speeds, then you're going to run into that.
Before we get started, Jason and I were having a bunch of trouble, and it was there were times where I'd say something, and 2 seconds later he would he'd finally hear it in the middle of what he was saying, and it was really difficult. That just doesn't work when you're trying to create music, right? So can all my kids do this? Ultimately, what you're going to be asking your students to do is perform independently. Are your students going to be able to independently perform whatever music they are in a room alone with nothing but a camera and a microphone or whatever device they're using? I think in most cases, the answer is yes, they're capable of that. But, obviously you'll have to spend some time teaching it. But you think about your situation, and is that something that you can get your students in a place where they can do? Do your students have access to the technology, instruments, or recording space they'll need to do this? So some thoughts, do they have access to devices? You can record yourself on just about anything that's fairly recent. You can use any smartphone, any iPhone, Android phone that mom or dad has floating around the house, or use theirs and send it. That's fine. If your school happens to have iPads or Chromebooks, I know if you're at the middle school, you have the MLTI devices that they probably have access to, then that's something that they physically have. So, but then there's also the space and time to do it. We all know that a lot of our kids don't come from the best home situations, and they may not have a quiet room in their house. So if that's the case, and especially, I'm going off the assumption that we're going to be doing this as some sort of graded thing that you're expecting your students to do. So do you have a space or time in your school where, when the students are physically in the building, where they could come and use a practice room to record something for 15 minutes that you can sanitize after? There's a ton of different options and ways to do that, but whoops, sorry. I get mouse happy. So are those things that you can work out? And then that goes along with the next point of, can you make accommodations as needed? I think we all know there's a lot of guidance departments that like to take a lot of their special ed kids and just drop them in chorus, whether that's a good thing for them or not. And we all know that for some kids that's a really helpful thing, and for some they're just there. So can you make accommodations? What your own students best. What kind of things can you do to make it possible for those students to be included? If you saw the Eric Whitaker's Virtual Choir 6, which came out a few weeks ago, there were, out of the 17,000 singers, there were over 200 singers using ASL who weren't singing it all. They were performing it through sign language. There's a lot of creative things you can do, and there's a lot of be aware you might be a little creative to make that happen. Okay. Yep. Yeah, that's a great point, Kath Murray. So having them record as well, but you may or may not include them in the recording that you put out to the public, or turn it down. And I'll be honest, with the main virtual choir, I had to do that as well. There were a few recordings that were just not usable. They weren't savable for a variety of reasons. And you're right, they don't know. So they can still say they were in, and they are in there. You just can't quite hear them.
And Josh, if I could just add in too, so if you're thinking about whether you would need to hold the recording device for a student that maybe needs that as an adaptive part of this experience, and you're able to do that, the main CDC's guidance on close, and I don't want to open up the can of worms on guidance right now. That's we have other sessions for that later. But the main CDC's definition of close contact is 15 minutes or longer within that 6-foot social distancing bubble. So if you're able to record something and you can do it in less than 15 minutes, then you technically have not made close contact with that student. So that, just to keep that in mind as well, that people are afraid that they can't break that 6-foot bubble, but you can within reason if you're making sure that you're wearing appropriate PPE, et cetera. So
great, thank you for that. So can you do this? That was the next piece here. Can you as the teacher do this? So first of all, do you feel comfortable with the concepts and the technology and everything? I'm going to try my best to help you feel at least comfortable getting started with the programs and the concepts through this and through next week. But I guarantee that you'll come up with two issues that there's no way I could have told you about. So Google, I love this. I read this somewhere a long time ago. Let the Google foo guide you. Like learning how to Google things appropriately and it is super, super helpful. And I'll be honest, YouTube has so many great tutorials for all of the technical things that you might run into that I guarantee you can find answers to any of your questions. If you know where to look. And by the way, my contact info is at the end. If you get to a point in any of this where you have a question and you're not quite finding the answer, please feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to try to help. I may or may not be able to. So the next piece is, do you have access to the tech that you will need? For me, knowing what a virtual choir could take for computer stuff, like I ended up upgrading my computer and paying for the Adobe suite of programs for this past year to be able to do the main virtual choir. I don't think I actually needed those. I think for me, it was more of an excuse to buy new computer parts because, quarantine shopping is fun, I guess. But will you have access to the tech you need? Depending on how big your ensembles are, your computers might get bogged down and you might have kind of a hard time dealing with 80 files. If you have an 80-piece band, or a 100-piece choir, taking all of those files and working on them at once will slow down. And so you may want to make sure that you have access to a computer that is a little bit more powerful than maybe the typical MacBook Air that a lot of schools might provide, or the older laptops. That doesn't mean that you won't be able to do it. I'm just kind of saying that it'll be a little bit slower if you have a larger group. The other pieces.
And if I could, Josh, just to jump in here real quick. So every one of your schools has access to coronavirus relief funds, and that was through the CARES Act that was passed. I don't know what version of the pandemic stimulus stuff that was, but your school has access. That's through a reimbursement model through the state. So if you can assemble a rationale about how you're going to use this to connect with students and to engage with their learning, then there's this would definitely fit within the guidelines for a piece of equipment that you would need in order to be able to engage with your students. So I encourage you to put together a rationale for this. If this is something that you would really like to do, and you find the equipment that you need, I would suggest that you put together a proposal for your school leaders and put that forward.
So Jen Fortin's question, would an external hard drive help with the storage of these large files? Absolutely, yes. That's something I was about to suggest. If you're getting all your files through Google Drive or something like that, which is probably going to be the best way for a lot of you to get files back and forth from your students, that will most likely not be great for using with one of these programs. You'll want to have local files. There is Google Drive file stream, which depending on your computer, you might have access to, which allows your Google Drive files to be held locally on the computer itself. So then when you go into your editing software, it can pull from that local file instead of pulling it from the internet every time. Love how I reach up to the internet up in the cloud up there. So yes, if you have an external hard drive, or if you can set up something called Google Drive file stream, so those files are local on your computer, that would be very, very helpful. And it's easy to set up. Well, you just have your drive connected, and whatever your program is, you just kind of direct it to where those files are on that. Space, how much space do you need? If you're talking, if you have like a 500 gig hard drive, you'll have way more than enough space. For most people, like 64 gig thumb drive might work. Will probably work in most cases. It depends on the size of your group, and it depends on what kinds of files they're sending you. If they're just sending you audio, it's not going to be that big at all. If they're sending you video files, that can get a lot bigger depending on how some things are set up. But I would be comfortable with a 64 gig thumb drive, and maybe wanting to get a little bit more if you're worried about it and have a really big group. Other tech things, microphones, if you need to have some microphones for any recording space, or that students can borrow to go along with that, and then having the software that you'll need to edit, which there are free options, absolutely, but you can pay for things if you want to. And time. Editing is not a quick and easy thing. So for the main virtual choir, I admittedly was learning the programs I was using as I was doing it. I had been working on other programs, and I switched to Adobe, so there's that piece of it. But it took me probably 10 to 15 hours to edit all of that stuff to put that video out, maybe a little more. Depends on how fancy you want it all to be, but you can expect to spend at least a few hours putting music together and creating videos if you're going to do that. It depends on how big your group is, and it depends on how well you plan too. That's the other thing here, is I realized in the editing process how many mistakes I made in the planning process that could have helped me a lot. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then you have to know your school and your program. So would it be beneficial to your students' development? Almost definitely, I think, for most people. Pat, we'll talk about the programs a little bit later, and that I'm probably more so next week after I kind of know what you're already familiar with. On the last slide of I'm going to go through a bunch of different ones. So for pretty much, I can't see a reason why it wouldn't be beneficial, but again, you know your students better than I do. Can it make sense with your academic expectations and your school's COVID-19 response? I think the ideal situation for this is a hybrid model, which it sounds like a lot of schools are moving towards, where if you can get a little bit of time in the classroom to work with them once in a while, and then do kind of the flipped classroom thing, you got to figure out those pieces. There's a ton of different ways to do this. And then along with your academic expectations and your grading piece, I think this is a great opportunity to do regular check-ins. If you were going to have this be a semester-long process, you can have multiple check-ins with, that are graded, and where you give feedback and have that be part of your curriculum. You make that fit and work for you. So, and then what does your school and community expect from your program? And as far as like the public release thing, like for some schools, like just kind of sharing it on the school's Facebook, and that's going to be enough and everyone's going to be happy. Some schools might have really high expectations for whatever you're going to say. And so you got to kind of gauge what people are going to want to see. I think for the vast majority of us, for us to put out anything that, is still showing our kids are making music and being productive, and they're not just twiddling their thumbs at home for this school time that they're supposed to be doing. You can see, like, this is getting our faces, and so I see a lot of value in that. But your communities, so figure that out. So this was a good time. So those were all the kind of considerations that I would want to think about. And then now getting into some more kind of specific things. But I guess this is a good chance to stop and for any other questions we've had so far. Yeah, so let's just take a minute and get caught up. Is the pace going okay for everyone? Not moving too fast, am I? Good.
See some thumbs up. That's good.
Good.
Yeah, just clarification while we're stopped for a second. Carol raised a good point about CARES Act money needing to be spent and your item or your equipment or whatever received. And actually the date, as strange as it is, the date is actually December 30th and not the 31st. Not that any of you would wait until literally the very last day, but just keep that in mind, that your purchases need to be made and your equipment received prior to December 30th. Or end of business on December 30th. That's the deadline for CARES money. And who knows with what they're working on in Washington right now, if there will be another round of this type of money that will be extended beyond this. Who knows?
So Pat had another question for you, Jason.
Yeah, I just see it right now.
Students gathering.
Independently meaning outside of school. Pat, can you unmute? There you go.
Yeah, in their own homes, like gathering in the social distancing and having, trio, quartets gathering.
We have we don't have a ton of authority anyway from an oversight standpoint as the Department of Education because of local control, but I would say what people do outside of school is their business.
But if they're using it to submit to me for comments and feedback,
yeah,
school related, does that have any impact?
I can't imagine that it would. I mean, it's not unlike students getting together to do a homework assignment together and submit it to you from their basement or garage or wherever. I mean, I would think that would be akin to it.
Pat, sorry, Pat, go ahead.
I think that's certainly something we can all be thinking about, in terms of the need for the kids to get together and make music with at least one other person besides just, doing a solo etude.
Mm-hmm.
So, Pat, my thoughts on that, I have two thoughts that come to mind. Is that seems like an administrator level question.
Yeah.
And then the second thought is it's easier to get forgiveness than permission sometimes.
Right.
So that might be one of those things that you just kind of casually mention to your students as a way to do things, but that you're not specifically asking them to do as part of their grade.
Right.
I wonder if the pandemic changes the gravitas of that old axiom, though. I don't know. That's a really good question.
Yeah. Okay. Decent editing programs. So I can mention this more later. Most of them are free. So Logic Pro and Finale are the pro versions of the Mac software, and those are both around like $200 a piece. The Adobe Suite is a subscription-based program that, with an educator's discount, what I'm paying right now is about $20 a month. The normal cost is about $60 a month. So or something close to that. I don't remember exactly what it was. But there are some really good programs that are totally free. And we'll talk about those. DaVinci and Audacity, they're not the easiest to use. They have some quirks, but they do everything you need to do for completely free if you're on PC. And GarageBand and iMovie on Mac can do everything for free as well. Those are always built into those computers. So pre-planning. So you decide you really want to do this, and these are some of the things you need to think about before you get started. Again, with your community, do you want to put out a video or slideshow? Do you want, when this goes out to your community, do you want them to see all these pretty pictures and all the kids' faces and all in the nice little, or are you just worried about getting it together? And Melinda, I did not have my school pay for it. I had to use my school email address, but I'm paying for it out of my own pocket, and I still get the educator discount. So, yeah, good. You're welcome. What software, you got to figure out what softwares you're going to use. And this kind of goes along with the discussions we've been having here. What is best for your situation? So there's a lot of things to think about. What are you going to have your students, what are you going to ask your students to use to record and to send back to you? Do you use Google Classroom? Is there another program, another similar interface that you use with your students? There's something called Flipgrid that might be really good for a lot of you. If you're familiar with Flipgrid, you set up kind of classrooms similar to a Google Classroom program, and it allows students to record their videos right in the program, and it sends it to you. You can set it so the students can see each other's videos, or that it can be isolated so that only you see them. There's some really neat things with that. I highly encourage you to check that out for a ton of reasons, whether it can just be super useful in a ton of scenarios. And then for you figuring out what software you want to use, we'll talk more about that later. What's best for your situation? What can you afford? What will work better for everyone's? Yes, Lauren, great point. You can, on Flipgrid, you can with one click download all of the kids' files, and it'll come down in a zip file, I think. Yeah, so you got to figure out what in your school situation with your computer and tech and your ability, what software do you want to use and what you want to ask your students to use. And then you really should have a timeline in mind for how you want to do this. When do you want to release this? Like, do you want this to come out around your same concert time and have that be kind of a thing, and maybe do like a little virtual party around concert time? Something like that. When are you going to start teaching this? When are you going to get the files out to your students? When are the due dates for those check-ins if you're going to do that? Or when do you need the videos by? How long do you expect it to take you to do the editing? Whatever you think that is, add a week to it, please. You figure out all those things and just kind of plan out this just like you would plan out any other unit. And one of the things I throw on here, it doesn't really fit in this, but something you're going to have to think about when you're planning is some element of your teaching is going to be having to teach students how to record and how to kind of set up their equipment and where to put a microphone, and how far away should they be. If they're singing, they can be fairly close. If they're playing trombone, they probably want to be in the next room over. Those are things you're going to kind of want to think about and talk about, and that's stuff I'll try to talk about in that next session too. So those are some big ones, and probably the most important decision you have to make is choosing your literature. Yeah, so the built-in mics, we have a question from Carol. The built-in mics on MacBooks provide reasonable quality for recording your mix. I don't think it's really worth it to order USB mics for each student. To be honest, like a MacBook or an iPad or an iPhone will record okay quality. And if you're somewhat familiar with the editing software, there's a lot of little tricks you can do to kind of make it sound a little bit nicer and hide some of the not so nice stuff. Um, what I might do is you might want to have a few that you kind of have around your classrooms and stuff, so that students can record there with it, and have at least some nicer sounds that you can make. But I don't think it's worth spending that much to have 30 or 40 or whatever. um, to me, I wouldn't do that anyway. So choosing literature. Beneath the Pines, the piece I did for the Maine Virtual Choir, is an absolutely beautiful piece of music. Written by Andrew Hurst, a York native. The conductor was Christian Giddings, who's from Unity, if I remember right. Absolutely beautiful piece of music. Stupidest piece I could have ever picked to do for a virtual choir. If you had a chance to listen to it, it really is really, really nice. But there's a lot of things that I didn't think about when I went into it. First of all, the accompaniment in that piece there's these hemiola effects all throughout, and it's very, very hard to get a real good sense for where the rhythmic pulse is, just from the accompaniment. So right off the bat, you're making it harder for your students to have something solid to follow along to. And then beyond, the next thing was that there's some rubato and some tempo changes in places that added to that difficulty, that made it a little bit harder. But then the biggest thing and this is one of the reasons it took me so much time to edit, was there was, I think, an 8-measure section where there was no accompaniment at all. And as we know, students don't always follow conductors exactly the way we want them to. And when you're following a video of a conductor, it's even harder to all choose the right way. What ended up happening with the Maine Virtual Choir is I had 20 different versions of a pickup and 20 different versions of how long a quarter note is. And what I had to do to make it sound as good as it did, and it still wasn't perfect, was go through and manually, note by note, adjust the length of each singer's rest periods and go through and make sure that each sound lined up, looking at the waveforms in the thing. And it took way longer than it needed to. If I had done these few things, if I had gone through the piece and looked at the rhythmic stuff to see how easy it would be for them to sing together. Simpler is better. If you have a piece of music that is primarily unison rhythms, even if there's harmonic stuff that's more difficult, the rhythmic piece is what you're going to want to focus on. It's actually kind of funny. You can do some really, really complex harmonic things because the kids aren't going to hear the weirdness of those chords. They just are singing their note, depending on how you set it up. So rhythmically simple music, at least for the first ones that you do. As your students are more independent and more capable, you can definitely up that difficulty level. But you want definitely something you want to think about. Consistent metronomical tempos. If you have tempo changes, you want to make sure that they're really, really consistent, and that however you set up the guide tracks makes it very, very clear how that's happening. This reminds me, for any of you who have ever done marching band stuff, I'm just going to throw this out here. I did a lot of marching band, and I still work with some marching band stuff through the years. You can have your marching band standing still playing a piece of music, and they can sound amazing, and that's 100% their best sound. The moment they take one single step, you can expect them to lose 40 to 50% of the quality, and then you have to rework that back up. I think this is going to be kind of a very similar thing, where in your classroom, with you there and with all the support of the other singers around or other instrumentalists, I'm saying this as using singing terminology because that's the one I did, but I get the band thing too. It's like, once they go home and they're alone and they lose all that support, they're going to lose a lot of their musical capability at first. You can work up to that. you can work up to that with some guidance. You just have to teach them how to be independent, and to how to follow those tempos and be really consistent with it. So the other piece when you're thinking about literature is getting a legal amount of copies. And how do you distribute them? Are you going to get enough paper copies to everybody, digital? And then there's permission to distribute the recordings themselves. Most publishers and composers have been really lax about this and not worried about the virtual choir thing. But you may want to make sure and reach out, depending on who you're going through and where you're getting your music from. Below this, and I think we'll share the slides here at some kind of page on copyright law and all that stuff. It doesn't really specifically talk about virtual choirs, but it gives you a place to start if you're kind of concerned about that. And I also put a link to Choir Unlimited, and this is the publishing company that publishes Beneath the Pines, and I thought they just have a really, really neat deal that works perfectly for trying to do something like this. Choir Unlimited has kind of a flat rate thing where it's if you buy music from them, you buy a license to the song. It's $50, I believe, and that is a license for unlimited reproduction and performance and recording rights, I think, are in there. I'm not positive, but $50 for unlimited reproduction rights for the music. So they send you a digital copy and then you make all the photocopies you need. And that's the deal. You don't have to buy new copies all the time. So I just think that's a really, really good deal. And that's that company is run by Christian Giddings, one of our main colleagues over at Kent's Hill. And there's some really, really amazing music from some awesome composers. So once you've kind of figured out all those things and figured out how to really make this all work in your school system, you get started, you follow your plans, do whatever you were going to do. But just think, can I make this work for all my kids? Can I do this? Does it really fit for me? Make sure you take some time to figure out what softwares you like. So I kind of put on here the Mac only software, GarageBand and Logic Pro, iMovie, Final Cut. These are all PC and Mac. Audacity is free. There's the Adobe Suite, which if you can afford it, it's really cool that the Adobe Suite gets you access to 28 or 30 different programs that all do different things. If you're interested in photo, video, animating, any of that stuff, all of that is included with the Adobe Suite. And that was the one that had the educator discount. If you're on PC, there's Windows Movie Maker, which is old, but it works for doing videos. DaVinci Resolve and Lightworks are a couple other free video softwares. And there's a bunch more than this too. There are many, many more softwares that you can check out. I just didn't have a ton of space and I didn't want to overload you with tons of things. Something else to think about here is that there are some web-based audio editors. If you wanted to kind of implement this on a small scale, you might want, for like Pat was saying, trios and quartets, small ensemble stuff, it might be okay to do something like this in Soundtrap or Soundation or BandLab. Those are 3 web-based things you just log into. They work in Chrome, and you can do all of that editing online and save it there. Those may not be great for a really big group, but if you're talking like 10 or less, those are probably a pretty good option for you. There's something else I wanted to mention. What was it? I don't know. It'll come back to me, I'm sure. So I put my email address here, jlund@mscd49.org. I also kind of run a Facebook group, the Mainly Music Ed Facebook page, and I do a podcast that I haven't done in a while because this summer has been so crazy that I can't think of the time or energy or anything to actually talk about on this podcast that nobody else has already talked about yet. But anyway, you can find me, you can contact me on Facebook through that group or through this email. And I will definitely try to get back to you as soon as I can. Posting the links to those programs for small ensembles, the web-based ones. Yeah, I can. So that's just be Soundation. It's those exact things plus.com, soundtrap.com. BandLab, actually, one of our colleagues, Jim Johnson over at Erskine, has been doing a YouTube series of guides on how to use it. So if you're interested in BandLab specifically, you can go check that out. He's been posting links on that Facebook page as well. Yeah, so go ahead and check those out. So that's about what I had for today, and I will gladly answer any questions I can. I may not have all the answers, but I will try, or somebody else might have answers too. Are you guys okay if I get out of this screen sharing?
Yeah, because we can share your slides too, Josh, if you're comfortable with that. I can send those out to those that registered for the session. So thank you, Josh, for helping to lay the groundwork on things and get people thinking about what this process is, and again, going through some of the pitfalls that you experience with the main virtual choir, so that you're saving people some time in the pre-work on this. And I know there are several people on the call that did some work. I know we have Victoria Stubbs with us. She did some work and did a co-facilitated presentation earlier in June. I think back in June, we talked about what she had done with her ensemble. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kathy Murray, but I think you did something as well, and there may be others too. Does anyone else want to talk about the things that you learned once you got into the process rather, and the project that you wish that you had laid better groundwork for on the front end? Because we're all in a situation right now where you have the opportunity to really get this laid out properly before you jump into doing the project, instead of having met with your students and you're going to kind of throw this together on the fly. So does anyone have any experience, things that they want to chime in with that they wish that they had known at the beginning that they know now? You can feel free to unmute yourself if you want and chime in. Go ahead, Vicki.
Yeah, I have a question for Josh.
Sure.
Spring, I used Soundtrap with the students, and we did small combos of maybe 5 or 6 people, and we used a MIDI version of the song to load up and have them kind of match to it. Yep. And it all worked pretty well except for drummers. There were one drummer had a set at home, an acoustic drum set. Another drummer had an electric set, and the electric sort of kind of worked. The acoustic set would distort. So every time the student tried to play in, he would get all this crap sounding as he was playing, and he said, I can't go forward.
Right. So in that, this is something I was hoping to talk about next week.
Oh, okay.
But specifically, percussion runs into a ton of issues with clipping and distortion with the microphones, and that's, I think, for singers and for like woodwind players, for the most part, they'll be okay if they give enough space between themselves and the microphones. Brass players and percussion especially, it's going to be real tricky. And and now that we say that, I kind of take back what I said earlier about USB mics, and that might be one exception would be to have a USB mic that has a gain knob on it for musicians that are on those really loud instruments, because you're going to need to be able to turn that gain way down, just because those are so loud they just overpower the microphones. So something like a Blue Yeti or a Blue Nano, I think that as long as it has the gain knob that you can turn down for those really, really loud instruments, that would be valuable. And I think for a lot of us, people, percussionists and some of those big instruments, they probably will have to record at school anyways. I know for many of us, our percussionists probably don't have a drum set at home, or maybe can't play at home because of the nature of their instruments. So definitely something to think about. And with the exit tickets, this is, I'm really hoping to kind of put some of that stuff together for next week.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Vicki, for that question. Carol raises a really great point about making sure that you have all of your permissions, your media permissions, releases done through your school, which most of your schools have your students do anyway, because this is going to go out, broadcast out as if it were, your district may decide to put it on a website. It'll definitely be probably on YouTube. There are ways, and Josh, I'm sure you could maybe outline briefly, or maybe even, because I know Vicki and Michelle, when they presented, were talking about how to restrict the access to it by doing more of a direct link, or to have it up for a limited period of time, like a premiere type thing where it only lives for a short period of time. But there are some precautions and things that you can take to limit the access to the file. And in fact, some of you could even, if you coordinate with your tech directors in your district, you could probably host it on your school's network, and then have it be of limited access to members of the school community or your geographic community. So Josh, do you want to add anything to?
So the thing with tech is there's always tons of options for different ways to do things. And I would highly suggest talking to your computer teacher or tech director for your school. And that is going to be a valuable person for you to talk to. So you can, if you're using YouTube, you can do things that are unlisted, which then you can't find it naturally on YouTube. You can only access those videos with the link. You can do things through a Google site. You can, if you're a Google school, I know I am, and a lot of you probably are, you can create your own little website using Google Sites. And I think you can restrict those to only be accessible by people in your domain. So your students could log in and access it, and then they can show their parents. And that would be something like that. There are definitely other options. Like Jason was saying, it could be posted in a login locked part of your school's website. There are definitely ways to do that if you're concerned about the permissions and the sharing. Yeah, and absolutely, as Carol was saying, making sure that you have all those permissions, media permissions for the video piece. And as we mentioned earlier, if someone doesn't have video permissions, you can still use their voice, just have them only record video. And for the main virtual choir, I just left that as optional to anyone who wanted to make video, send it in. Great. If you only want to do audio, great. You'll have a lot of kids who will be really uncomfortable with the camera idea as well. So like that might be something you just want to leave open to them. There was another thing in here from Lauren. So you ran into some issues with video lag in iMovie. So in that's kind of what I meant about, maybe having a stronger computer to upgrade. Lauren, could you tell me what kind of computer were you using?
So I was using a school-issued MacBook Air, and we just got approved for MacBook Pros through the school to handle it.
Great.
What I was
curious. So you shouldn't have that problem on a MacBook Pro. Even the lower tier ones are going to be so much more powerful than a MacBook Air. MacBook Airs are great for surfing the web and doing basic things, but something more intensive like that, you can do it in small groups, but you're going to have a pretty hard time with anything larger than 8 or 10 singers, especially if you're doing video.
Terry Henry asks if we're familiar with Rehearsal Live Share. Terry, I'm not familiar with that myself. Can you talk to us a little bit about it? Is it something you've heard of, Josh?
I've actually been trying to Google it over here while you guys were
talking. Okay. Terry, can you fill in the gaps a little bit of our knowledge?
Well, I'm afraid that I'm the wrong person to ask. I happened to come across it in a Facebook group, And so somebody said that you could use this as a way to rehearse together. Of course, we're all familiar with the lag and not being able to rehearse with other people. And somebody said that you could do up to 11 people and rehearse real time. And so other than that, I don't really know anything about the program. I was hoping somebody there might.
So there
Yeah,
you
so
go. Pat Michaud and
Yeah.
others, maybe that's an emerging solution. Maybe that's some emerging technology. Go ahead, Josh. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It looks like it's partly through Adobe. I can't. I'm just barely scratching the surface of what this is. They claim that it is essentially real time. I would be very, very skeptical of it. I think there are ways you can speed up some of the thing, but to do it truly real time, it probably will still have some difficulties. But
You know what though, Terry? We'll look into it. Yeah, we'll look into it between now and next week, and then maybe Josh, we can add that to our docket of things when we dig more into some of the specific technology platforms and software pieces and hardware components. We can maybe research that a little bit more, Terry, and have some more information on it. That's something I was not familiar with, but I mean, we're living in a world where the free market is working on developing everything that they can, because there's clearly a need and a desire for this type of technology. So driving innovation right there. Anyone else have any questions or comments, statements, anything you want to chime in with? Go ahead, Melinda.
Did I miss any of the written?
I just have a quick question. If students send you just audio recorded from a phone or computer or whatever, do you have to, on these programs you're talking about, do you have to convert those to a certain format to use them, or they just, I know when I use my digital recorder, I have to convert to WAV format so if somebody sends me an MP3, I have to turn it into WAV to work with my recorder.
So that depends on, possibly. That depends on what you're using and what programs you're using.
Okay.
So I think that goes into the pre-planning piece about software and stuff, because you could say that when you send it to me, I need it to be this file format, and if you need them to send you WAV files, there's probably a way on whatever device they're using for them to make that option available. It may not be, and that may just be something you'll have to kind of work out on your own. But I remember you do elementary school, so maybe that may be a little difficult for your kids, but
that's all right. I just was wondering. I do 5th and 6th grade band, and so okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure, Josh, in next week's session, when we start talking again about dig a little deeper into the technology stuff, I'm sure you're going to talk about file conversion and formats and working with raw data and stuff like that. So, which is
and there's a ton. I will be honest, that next session will probably be a lot longer if we really want to get into all those nitty-gritty details, and that's part of why I said be comfortable with Googling things, because I guarantee there will be things that I miss that you run into when you're trying to do this, that the answer is out there 9 times out of 10. If you put in the right Google search, how to convert MP3 to WAV on iPhone, that'll give you an answer pretty quickly. In Melinda's case, it's just a matter of, not being afraid to Google and read through stuff. So, other questions? Comments, concerns, verbal lashings for my mistakes?
So next week's session, while we're waiting if anyone has any other questions, you can pop them in the chat. I can't see everybody's screen because we have so many people on here. They only have so many that fit on a screen for me. As we're talking about the future sessions of this series, so like Josh has alluded to, next week we're going to dig more into the the technology and do a deeper drill down into that. What Josh has used, what's available out there, trying to do a rundown. So the chances of us using our full 90 minutes next week is going to be a little more realistic because there are so many options. And I think, like Josh said, get comfortable with Googling things, because it's going to be really difficult for us to possibly cover every type of technology, piece of hardware, piece of software, again, because things are emerging, but there's just so many different options. And so we're going to work our best, though, to try to give you a whole buffet of things that you can experiment with to see which one works best for you. Because, like Josh laid out in this setup, there are pieces of software and accessibility that are going to be more accessible to younger students. And then there are things that you can do with older students that require a little more, being a little more tech savvy. But, and that's not to say that first graders aren't tech savvy. Many of them are in the age that we're living in. But, depending on whether your school uses iPads or MacBooks or Chromebooks, or whether they're doing it on their phone, it's going to be hard to figure out every configuration, but we're going to do the best we can to try to give you lots of information on that. The third session, we're actually probably going to delay until sometime in the fall, because we're really hoping that the third session will be where we then go through. So you've gotten all these files from your students. Here's how you start to put things together. And this 3-session series may turn into a 4-session series, depending on what it takes in order for us to be able to try to meet everybody's needs and make this a positive experience. So I'm really happy that Josh agreed to help lead us through this a little bit. And we look to the collective village of our music educator colleagues around the state that have a great body of knowledge to help support everybody in this work. And so if there's anything that comes up between now and next week that you run into that you think is a really great resource, you can save it till next week. You can email it to Josh, you can email it to me, and we'll be happy to share it, and I can get all that information out. Yeah, there are questions about inviting other people to future sessions, and absolutely, if you have a tech director that has the time available in their schedule and you want to invite them, absolutely.
Yep.
The same link that you use to register, which let me see if I can drop that in the chat really quick. You can ask them to register, and then they'll get the link, and then they can hop on wherever they are. Oh, let me pop that for everybody.
Yep. I just dropped my email address in the chat box as well. So if you didn't catch that earlier, feel free to email me. I am that glutton for punishment that has all my work emails go to my phone, so I will get it pretty quickly. Happy to
Anyone else have anything for the good of the order? I decided to, anybody, I'm waiting just to see. I'm not giving enough wait time. I need to make sure I do that. I'm looking. I decided to change my approach on the contact hours with this a little bit through the department. Instead of trying to keep track of whether everybody attends every session, I'm going to give separate certificates for each session, because you may or may not be able to attend all of them. So I'm going to put the link to the exit ticket. And if you haven't done this with me before, I'm going to put this in the chat box. The idea is, once you complete the form, when you get your thank you for submitting message, after you submit your feedback, there will be a link to a professional development certificate right in there, so you can click on it. It should open up a new tab in your browser. At the bottom of that window, put your name in and then hit print. And then you should have an option, depending on your system, whether you want to print it on paper or you can print it as a PDF. You can print to a PDF file. If you're keeping your professional portfolio digitally, you should have that option to either print a certificate on paper or print it digitally. And if anybody runs into any issues with that, let me know, send me an email. I'll put my email in the chat box, even though I'm sure everybody knows my email. I've heard from many of you recently, which has been really exciting and good. I like staying connected with you guys, even though I wish I had better answers for you for some of your questions and issues. But
So Jason, it appears there's an issue with the form.
oh, sorry. Yes, I had it set up. Josh and everyone to open at 11:30, but let me see if I can change that. I also have it set up just to be open for 24 hours because anyone that goes to watch the video later, part of this deal is to award credit to those people that are putting in the time live here to do this. So let me see if this fixes it. If you want to refresh that tab or refresh your whatever tab or browser you have that exit ticket in, you should be able to submit your response now. This video, as well as the future sessions, will be available on the department's YouTube channel, which I think I put a link to that in the chat earlier. And also, if you're not familiar how to save the chat from this session, if you go down in the chat box at the bottom where you type your message, click on the box that has 3 dots. If you hover over it, it should say More, and then you can click Save Chat. And it will save it as a text file, which is a universal file format on your machine, and then you can go back and access the links and everything later. When you access that file, the links aren't going to be live, so you're not going to be able to click on them in the text file. You're going to have to copy and paste them into a browser. But that will at least let you have record of all the information that we had in the chat today. The same last piece of housekeeping that I'll give you, the same link that you use to get into this session will work for the future sessions as well, or at least next week's session, and then I may have to do a new link for the one that we follow up with in the fall. And then I promise this is the last piece of housekeeping. Starting today and running on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 o'clock, I'm sorry that it's late, but it's because I have other prior meetings scheduled at the department. I've set aside 4 to 5:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays as an opportunity for any of you to get together with me to talk about what your school's reentry plan is for the fall. And hopefully if we have enough people that are in common situations, we can group and use breakout rooms so that you can have an opportunity to chat with colleagues about what your individual situation is going to be, and you can start brainstorming some solutions, creative solutions to how we're going to get through this emergency start to the school year. And I can put the link to that as well in the chat box for you. It's going to take me a second to pull that up. I should be able to. And that's not a register for, you can just use this link anytime between now and the first week in September. And you can, yes, it's going to be every Tuesday and Thursday, Josh, starting today. I've set aside that 4 to 5:30. So feel free to drop by if you want. You're not obligated to come to any or all of them, but I'll be there with the room open. So if as your situation evolves and things change, use that link that I just put in the chat box. Again, from now to the end of the first week of September, that's my hope to be available to you to help you get started off on the right foot. Anyone else have anything for the good of the order? Well, thank you all for being here again today, and thank you, Josh, for your efforts to get us thinking in the right direction on this, and I look forward to our session next week. Hope you all can make it. We'll be on again at 10 o'clock this time next week to dive a little deeper into the technology stuff. So have a great rest of your week, everybody. Maybe I'll see some of you this afternoon.